Hello and welcome to the Ch.10 Reads, and today I'm going to be reading The Lost Heir by Ch.10 Sutherland, and this is Chapter 10. Tell. Don't tell. Mother needs to know who it is. But what if she thinks we killed her? Tsunami didn't know what to do. It was too strange a coincidence. Kestrel turning up dead a few islands away at the same time as the dragonets arriving at the summer palace. If Tsunami admitted she knew her, wouldn't her mother's first thought be that the dragonets had killed her themselves? After the way her friends had been looking at her lately, Tsunami didn't want to risk getting a similar reaction from her mother. What kind of dragon are you, really, and can you be trusted, and who else might you attack looks. She worried about it all the way back to the summer palace. Mercifully, they flew back, giving Tsunami's swimming muscles a rest. But in the bustle of orders and flying messengers, there wasn't a moment to talk to the queen on her own anyway. Back at the palace, Queen Coral told Tsunami to wait for her, and took a few council dragons off for a war meeting. Tsunami sat on one of the pavilion pillars, watching dragons dart about. Who would kill Kestrel? Apart from Glory or me, that is. She glanced at the cave where her friends were being held, where the guards were still posted outside. She knew she should go check on the other dragonets, but what would they think when they heard about Kestrel? What if her friends decided it wasn't safe here? Starflight might convince the others that Kestrel's murderer could be nearby, waiting to kill them too. He talked them into leaving the Kingdom of the Sea, and Tsunami wasn't ready for that. They were all too mad at her right now to listen to sense. And they were probably pretty grumpy about being stuck in a guarded cave all afternoon, too. It'd be better to wait and tell them everything after they had a chance to see how wonderful it could be here. Tomorrow, she'd ask her mother to bring them out for a feast or something, and that would cheer up at least a couple of them. Yes, that's a better plan. Avoid them until tomorrow, then tell them everything. Besides, she was so tired. Darkness had fallen as they flew back to the summer palace, and now the cavern was lit only by trails of glowing jellyfish in the water below. Not that it mattered to Seawings, who could see in the dark, but her friends probably wouldn't be too thrilled about having no light, either. Another argument that could wait until tomorrow. She was relieved when the queen finally came down from the council level and led her across the lake. Queen Coral's chambers at the summer palace were in a vast underwater cave below one of the waterfalls, lined with waving tendrils of forest green and brilliant gold anemones. Stone carvings of dolphins danced around the entrance. The walls were studded with emeralds and pearls, and the beds were soft expanses of bubbly seaweed. A bed was already made up for Tsunami right next to anemones. She collapsed onto it with a sigh. Sleeping underwater on comfortable seaweed instead of a hard ledge of stone was even more wonderful than she'd imagined. She fell asleep to the sound of the waterfall splashing overhead, and didn't wake up until the next morning. When she opened her eyes, she found the pale pinkish-blue head of an enemy leaning over her. Tsunami yelped and leaped back, crashing into the stone wall and bouncing off it in a stream of bubbles. She had a wild, brief moment of thinking an enemy had been about to kill her, and then her sister waved her talons and made a shushing gesture. An enemy pointed at Queen Coral, who was still asleep. She clasped her talons in front of her and flashed some of the stripes on her wings and tail. Sorry, little sister. Tsunami spread her front talons and shook her head. I wish I could. An enemy flashed her stripes again, then smacked her head, remembering that Tsunami didn't know aquatic. She frowned in frustration. Tsunami felt equally frustrated. They couldn't sneak off to the surface to talk. An enemy was trapped here by the harness, tethering her to the queen. And Tsunami couldn't communicate underwater. They'd never have a chance to talk privately. She swam over to her sister and studied the harness. It was made of a stretchy, gummy, clear material that seemed to cling to an enemy's scales, as if it had grown along with her. It probably has, Tsunami thought, wondering if the poor dragonette would have to wear this until she was Tsunami's age, or even older. When Tsunami tugged on it lightly, an enemy shook her head. She mimed trying to wriggle out of the harness and pointed to the queen again. Not possible without waking her up, Tsunami guessed, if it's even possible at all. An enemy carefully eased towards the entrance, glancing back at the queen. The cord between them uncoiled. The little dragonette lifted off the floor and swam toward the top of the door, stretching the leash to its full length. She beckoned Tsunami after her. Where the waterfall met the lake, just behind the cascade and right outside the cave entrance, There was a small pocket of air at the end of her leash, and Nene was barely able to reach out with her snout. Tsunami popped her head up beside her. Clever, Tsunami said, glancing around. Here they were also hidden from view, if any sealings were out and about this early in the summer palace. I hope she doesn't wake up, Anemone said. She blinked at Tsunami for a moment, then burst out, Oh, I'm so glad you're here. She reached out one of her front talons, and Tsunami pressed it like they had the day before. Really? Tsunami said, astonished. But aren't we rivals? If I'm here, doesn't that threaten your chance at the throne? Maybe you can make her less crazy, Anemone said in a whisper. Or maybe she'll set me free now that she has you. Maybe you could talk to her. I need to get out of this harness, Tsunami. You have no idea how awful my life has been. Tsunami stared at her, hearing the echo of her own words. Your life is awful, she said. You can't even imagine awful. Try being raised under a mountain with no ocean or proper sunlight and only a river to swim in. Try being raised by 3 dragons who hate you and treat you like blobby tadpole. I am treated like a tadpole, and then we protested. Mother doesn't trust me to do anything by myself. But you're only what, 1 year old? Tsunami guessed, I'm sure that'll change. Well, I'm mostly sure, halfway sure. And at least she cares about you. She cares about me way too much, Anemone said. I never get to do anything except whatever she's doing. At least you have friends. I never even seen any other dragonettes. Well, I was sort of stuck with those 4, Tsunami said. And they're always arguing with me or getting mad about something. She felt a pang of guilt about not visiting them the night before. They must be wondering where she'd gone. Well, maybe if they miss me for a while, they'll be more pleased to see me when I do show up. They seem great, Anemone said wistfully. I always wanted brothers and sisters. Don't you have brothers? She snorted. Yes, but Mother thinks they play too rough, and she won't let me near them. My cousins are all possible suspects in her mind, except Moray, who's perfect and boring and old and can do no wrong. And non-royal dragonettes aren't special enough for me to play with. Anemone sighed, blowing bubbles across the water at Tsunami. I guess my friends are right when they're not complaining, Tsunami admitted. They complain a lot, though. I tried complaining once, Anemone said with a stab of venom in her voice. Mother nearly got me gagged to match the harness. At least somebody loves you, Tsunami said. And you're with your own kind, and you know your own stupid language. She loves you too, Anemone offered. She paused, glancing down into the cave. Queen Coral was still fast asleep, her blue scales rising and falling smoothly. I hope you'll take Whirlpool, Anemone blurted. 3 moons, I was so sure I'd have to marry him. But now you're here, you can have him, and that'll be much better. No way, Tsunami said, lashing her tail. No, no, no. An image of Riptide flashed in her head, which was ridiculous because she hardly knew him either. Absolutely not. First of all, I don't even have time to get married. I have to stop the war and save the world. And or learn how to be queen at the Seawings. Second of all, that dragon? No thank you. I'd rather have my tail nibbled off by snapping turtles. Anemone giggled. He's dreadful, isn't he? Your smaller majesties, Tsunami swarmed, imitating this fake grin in the tiny bow. Anemone had to stick her head under water so her giggling wouldn't shake the harness and wake the queen. Anyway, Mother can't decide who we marry, Tsunami said. Really? Anemone said doubtfully. She gets to decide everything else. We're royalty, Tsunami pointed out, meaning we do whatever we want. Gosh, that is not what I've seen, Anemone said. More like, we're royalty, so we only get to do what historical seaman queens would approve of us doing. For the good of our subjects, for the honor of the throne, for the yawn, claw me to death already. Tsunami laughed, but her gills felt choked, and her scales prickled uncomfortably. She never thought of royalty that way. Did queens really have to worry about honor and their dragon's approval? What would happen if a seaman queen, or potential queen, decided to stay married someone the rest of the tribe disapproved of, or choose not to get married at all? It would be harder to rule subjects who didn't respect you. Tsunami had enough trouble with her usual 4. She mentioned a whole grumbling tribe full of glories and starflights. But no one would dare argue with the queen, would they? Maybe it depended on the kind of queen you were. No one argued with Scarlet in the Skywings, that was for sure. But Scarlet was murderous and insane, not exactly the role model I want to follow. She stretched her wings out to feel the splashing of the waterfall. Outside their hidden spot, she could hear the quiet noises of the summer palace waking up. dragon wings fluttering overhead. Bubbles burbled up from underwater caves, where most of the sea wings were sleeping. Pots clattered on the kitchen level pavilion, reminding her of how hungry she was. Excuse me. Uh-oh, an enemy whispered, glancing down. I think she's waking up. We better go back in. Tsunami hesitated. Excuse me. Should she go visit her friends now? But what would her mother think if she woke up and found Tsunami gone? All right, she said, but I have one more question. What happened to Orca? If an enemy could tell her, she could put off going to ask Starflight about it. An enemy's pink-tipped wings shivered under the water. She challenged Mother for the throne when she was only 7 years old, she whispered. Everyone says it was horrible. She nearly won. But Mother killed her in the end. She glanced down again. It's weird. Mother worships her and misses her, but lots of dragons still hate Orca for nearly killing their queen. Don't ever mention her name around Moray. Moray, Tsunami echoed. She seems drippy, fatuous, about as interesting as a sea slime. I was going to say odd, Tsunami laughed, but those work too. Uh-oh! An enemy vanished below the water. Tsunami followed her, swimming back to her bed a few moments before Queen Coral opened her eyes. The queen sat up and stirred the water with her wings as she stretched. She beamed at Tsunami and an enemy, reaching to stroke their heads gently with her talons. The queen gathered her strands of pearls from the coral branch where they'd hung during the night. Carefully, she draped them around herself again, then decorated an enemy the same way. Tsunami hadn't taken off the one she'd been given the day before. Her mother smiled at this and produced another long strand of pearls, these a shimmering pale purple and oddly shaped instead of round. With expert talons, Queen Coral wound them around Tsunami's chest and wings. They were beautiful, but it was strange to have something weighing her down. Tsunami felt almost as if she was wearing a harness of treasure. She wasn't about to complain, though. The talons of peace had never given the dragon its beautiful things. Finally, the queen beckoned for them to follow her to the pavilion. Tsunami wasn't sure how she felt about being treated the same as an enemy, a 1-year-old dragonette, but she did like how her mother kept patting her, as if she wanted to make sure Tsunami was real. As they flew up to the pavilion, Tsunami saw several guards clustered on one of the lowest levels, half of them sleeping and half of them drinking something steaming out of handheld cauldrons. She noticed that they looked well-fed, well-rested, and content. Not thin and grumpy like Queen Scarlet's guards in the Scouting Palace. Proof that my mother is a better queen than Scarlet, Tsunami thought. When Queen Coral landed on the council level, a flurry of wing beats surrounded it all over the palace. Council members swept down from caves or surged up from the water below. Coral settled herself in the largest pool, which was labeled Queen. She tugged an enemy into the water with her, although it was a bit of a squeeze and the little dragonette had to curl under the queen's wing. Mother, an enemy protested. Quit squashing me. She wriggled around until there was a little more space for her. Small turquoise dragons darted in with platters of food, laying them all around the pools as the council members slipped into their places. Tsunami stood awkwardly to the side. She felt like her tail and wings were in the way of everything. Oh, said Queen Coral, finally noticing. Tsunami, you can sit there. Tortoise is guarding the hatchery at the Deep Palace, so she won't be joining us today. The queen pointed her claw at the pool, too, down from hers, labeled Dragonette Hair in tiny emeralds. The whetstone was chilly under Tsunami's talons as she climbed into it. The pools on either side of the queen said Defense and Communication. Sharks splashed down in the first one, and a moment later, Moray landed in the other. Good morning, Your Majesty, Moral said, bowing and dipping her wings. I know yesterday was a shocking day, but I hoped you slept well. I worried about you all night. Thank you, dear, said the queen. Her eyes were scanning the rest of the council. Whirlpool flew up beside Moray. His pool was labeled Magic and Publishing. Tsunami tilted her head at him. How did one become an expert in either of those things? What kind of magic did he know anything about? She glanced around, wondering if there was a pool for the king, but she didn't see one. Queen Coral hadn't said anything about Tsunami's father yesterday, and in all the excitement about Kestrel's body, Tsunami hadn't had a chance to ask. Maybe he was at the Deep Palace. Maybe she could meet him later today. She remembered some of the council from the day before. The plump dragon, Lagoon, who had been set to feed the other dragonettes, sat in a pool marked, aquaculture. Piranha, the one who'd gone with Shark to examine and dispose of Kestrel's body, was in war. Tsunami didn't know any of the dragons' names, but from where she sat she could see the labels: treasury, justice, hunting. She didn't really understand this council business. She wasn't sure what they did, or why they were necessary. Wasn't it enough to have a queen? Couldn't Coral just decide everything herself? That's what I'd do, she thought. I'd get rid of this council and run the tribe like a proper queen. Maybe it worked for Coral, but Tsunami didn't need or want 11 dragons following her around, offering advice all the time. Her stomach rumbled, and she tried to remember what she'd last eaten. The platters around her were loaded with raw, rubby red fish, most of it sliced and deboned and arranged into fancy rolls with seaweed. She'd only ever eaten fish raw and whole, or sometimes scorched when her friends decided to set their dinner on fire. A few cauldrons held seething mountains of tiny green crabs. 3 large bowls contained some kind of salad of octopus tentacles and herbs that Tsunami had never seen before. She plucked out one of the tentacles and tasted it. It was rubbery but sweet, with a tang, like lemons and salt. She reached for another one and realized the whole council was staring at her. Nobody else had started eating yet. Oops. All the council eyes swiveled toward the queen, who was staring at a bit of octopus in Tsunami's claws. Excuse me. Coral shook her head and smiled. It's all right, the queen said, clapping her talons together. Naturally, I forgive my long-lost daughter for any accidental impudence. As we all know, she was raised by barbarians, so she couldn't know any better. I give you all permission to eat. Tsunami crushed the tentacle between her claws. Raised by barbarians? Perhaps it was true, but what a thing to say to Tsunami's future subjects. They'd think of her as the dragon who knew nothing about human customs. How would she ever earn their respect with that reputation? Was Coral deliberately making Tsunami look foolish in front of the other dragons? Tsunami stuttered her mother, while Coral helped herself to the largest pieces of fish and crunched through talonfuls of crabs. She dropped bits of food into Anemone's open mouth as she ate. Maybe not. Maybe Tsunami was seeing problems where there weren't any. Or maybe it wouldn't hurt to be a little more careful from now on. And that is the end of Chapter 10. Once again, this is The Lost Heir by Ch.10. Sutherland. It's the second book in the Wings of Fire series. Have a great day.